You got the promotion. You earned it. Years of work, late nights, solving problems nobody else could solve. And what's your first thought? They'll figure out I don't deserve this. Not excitement, not pride, fear. The certainty that you've somehow fooled everyone who believed in you. If that feeling sounds familiar, you're not alone, and you're definitely not a fraud. You're experiencing something psychologists have been studying for nearly 50 years. Here's what makes this so strange. Imposter syndrome doesn't hit the people who should be worried. It hits the people who have actual evidence they're competent. The surgeon who has never lost a patient on the table, the professor with a shelf full of awards, the engineer whose code runs systems used by millions. These aren't people who stumbled into success, they worked for it, and yet, they're the ones lying awake at night, waiting to be exposed. The story begins in 1978 at Georgia State University. Two psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, noticed something puzzling about their high-achieving female students. These women had earned their places, top grades, published research, professional accomplishments their peers envied. By every objective measure, they were successful. But in conversations with Clance and Imes, a different story emerged. These accomplished women didn't believe their success was real. They were convinced it was all a misunderstanding. Clance and Imes studied over 150 successful women, and they kept hearing the same thing. These women believed they'd somehow fooled everyone around them. They called it an internal experience of intellectual phoniness. The women knew they were intelligent, but deep down, they were certain they'd been given credit they didn't deserve. The researchers identified two patterns in their subjects' backgrounds, two different kinds of families that seemed to plant the seeds for this feeling. The first pattern, families where another sibling was labeled the smart one. No matter what these women achieved, they felt they were playing catch-up to someone else's natural talent. The second pattern was almost the opposite. Families who insisted their daughter was perfect at everything, effortlessly brilliant, never had to struggle. When these women inevitably did struggle, because everyone struggles, they couldn't reconcile it with the story they'd been told about themselves. If they were really that smart, why was this hard? This was groundbreaking research in 1978, but here's what's happened since. The phenomenon turned out to be far more widespread than anyone expected. Decades of follow-up research revealed that imposter syndrome doesn't just affect high-achieving women, it affects high achievers across every demographic, all genders, all backgrounds. According to recent workplace research, nearly 2/3 of knowledge workers worldwide, 62%, report experiencing imposter syndrome. This isn't a niche phenomenon, it's the norm. And that number is even higher for younger workers. 78% of Gen Z employees report imposter feelings at work, nearly 4 out of 5. So, what's actually happening in the mind of someone experiencing this? The mechanism is surprisingly specific, and understanding it is the first step to recognizing it in yourself. At the core is something psychologists call attribution bias. It's a systematic error in how we explain our own outcomes, both successes and failures. Here's how it works. When you fail at something, you internalize it. I failed because I'm not good enough. That failure feels like proof of who you really are. But when you succeed, that gets externalized. I got lucky. The task was easy. Someone helped me. I just worked harder than usual. The success never feels like it belongs to you. Think about what that does over time. Every failure accumulates as evidence against you. Every success gets explained away. The ledger only ever goes in one direction. And here's the cruel twist. High achievers are especially vulnerable to this. Perfectionism and high standards leave little room to internalize success. If your standard is perfection, then anything less than perfect feels like failure, and perfection is impossible to maintain, so you're always falling short of your own expectations. Meanwhile, the actual accomplishments, the things you've achieved that most people never will, those don't register. They were just what you were supposed to do. Researchers now prefer the term imposter phenomenon over syndrome, and there's an important reason for that distinction. This isn't a mental illness. It's not a diagnosis you receive. Around 70% of adults will experience imposter feelings at least once in their lifetime. 70%. This is closer to a shared human experience than a disorder. But even if it's common, the consequences are real. People dealing with persistent imposter feelings often develop coping strategies that backfire. One strategy: overwork. If you're terrified of being found out, you compensate by working twice as hard as everyone else. You arrive early. You leave late. You never say no. This strategy works for a while, but research shows a direct connection. 7 in 10 knowledge workers experience either burnout or imposter syndrome last year, and 42% experienced both. The other common strategy is avoidance. If you're afraid of being exposed, you might sabotage opportunities before they can reveal your true inadequacy. You don't apply for the promotion. You don't submit the proposal. You hold back in meetings. Better to stay invisible than to reach and fail publicly. The prevalence data is striking. Among undergraduates, imposter syndrome rates range from 30 to 75%. Among faculty and clinicians, people at the top of their fields, it's still 23 to 50%. Think about that. Half of the people teaching at universities, treating patients, leading research teams, half of them have felt like frauds at some point in their careers. And yet, they kept going. They published papers. They saved lives. They mentored students. The feeling of being a fraud didn't make them one. Now, some researchers argue we should be careful here. Not every feeling of uncertainty is imposter syndrome. Sometimes doubt is reasonable, even adaptive. Starting a new job, taking on a new challenge, feeling uncertain makes sense. You're in unfamiliar territory. That's not pathology. It's appropriate humility. The problem comes when the feeling persists, despite mounting evidence of competence. When you've proven yourself dozens of times, but each new success still feels like a fluke. Clance herself developed a measurement scale in 1985, the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale. It's still the most widely used tool for assessing these feelings today. The scale asks questions like, do you worry that people will discover you're not as capable as they think? Do you feel your success is due to luck rather than ability? For most people who experience imposter feelings, the answers to these questions feel obvious. Of course they worry. Of course it's luck. That's just reality. But here's the thing. When you compare their self-assessment to objective measures of performance, there's often a massive gap. The feeling doesn't match the facts. There's also an important debate about context. Some researchers argue that framing this as an individual problem ignores systemic factors. Women in male-dominated fields, minorities in predominantly white institutions, first-generation professionals navigating unfamiliar systems. These aren't people imagining extra scrutiny. They often face actual skepticism, subtle questioning, an extra burden of proof. The environment shapes the feeling. This doesn't mean the distorted self-perception isn't real. It just means the solution might involve changing systems as much as changing minds. So what actually helps? The research points to several approaches, and the first one might surprise you. Simply learning how common imposter feelings are tends to reduce their intensity. There's power in recognizing you're not alone. That feeling you thought was your shameful secret? Turns out most of your colleagues have felt it too. One practical approach: track your attribution patterns. When something goes well, notice your first instinct. Did you immediately credit luck, timing, or someone else's help? Try this. Keep an evidence file, a folder of accomplishments, positive feedback, completed challenges, concrete proof that counteracts distorted self-perception. The goal isn't to become arrogant. It's to align your self-perception with reality, to let the evidence count for something instead of dismissing it automatically. You might also want to pay attention to transitions. Imposter feelings often spike during promotions, new roles, or career changes. This is normal and temporary. Remember, feeling like an imposter is subjective. Actually being one requires objective evidence. The gap between those two is where the distortion lives. Clance and Imes wrote in their original paper, Despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing they're not bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. That was 47 years ago, and we're still having this conversation. Maybe that persistence tells us something about how deeply this pattern runs. The brain evolved to keep you alive, to warn you of threats, to make you cautious, to prepare for the worst. Sometimes applies that vigilance to your own success. It whispers, "This can't last. They'll figure you out. Better to stay alert." In a way, imposter syndrome is your brain trying to protect you from a fall. The problem is, it's often wrong about the threat. You're not about to fall. You've been walking this wire for years. You're actually quite good at it. If you're finding value in this kind of exploration, how our minds work, why we feel what we feel, consider subscribing. We explore psychology like this every week. One more thing that helps, sharing your experience. Not performing vulnerability, just honest conversation. I've been feeling uncertain about this role. Have you ever felt that way? You'll be surprised how often the answer is yes, and somehow, knowing that the person you admire has felt this way too, that does something. It loosens the grip. You got the promotion, you earned it. The voice saying otherwise, that's not wisdom. It's a glitch in a system that was built to spot threats, not to count victories. The evidence is there, the accomplishments are real, and maybe, just maybe, you can start letting yourself believe that. Because here's the truth that imposter syndrome hides from you. The people who promoted you, who hired you, who trusted you with important work, they weren't fooled. They saw something real. Maybe it's time you did too.